Hey guys, this is DP Carroll, and today I want to talk about a couple of things that I've seen on instrument check rides recently and try to clear up some confusion about why we might engage in certain best practices and why some SOPs might be better ideas than others. Recently, on several instrument check rides, I have become aware of a new idea. And a lot of times in aviation, when somebody has a new idea, uh, replacing SOPs that have been formed over decades of experience and hard-learned lessons by the airlines and military, usually those SOPs are not the best idea. There might be an exception, but in general, it's a good idea to learn from the experiences of people decades before us and do what they've found has worked. So the reason we have SOPs, so that we do something the same way every time in a ritual, if you will, so that if we end up in a really stressful situation in the airplane, if we are always doing things the same way every time, according to SOPs, then that's going to help us catch something that we would have missed, because we'll notice, you'll get a strange feeling. I haven't done something, I know it, right? And so that's when you refer to your checklist and go through the hard-won, very specific procedures that have been learned for decades. So where do we get a lot of these best practice SOPs from? Well, the military, best training in the world. And then guess what? A lot of times that SOP trickles down to the airlines from the ex-military pilots there. The problem is that a lot of times we don't have people teaching who have those backgrounds. And so there may be good best practices that are not known until a pilot reaches the upper levels, if you will, of professional aviation. Sometimes we have things that we do in aviation because somebody told us to do it that way, but you don't really know why. And then as you proceed through aviation and continue to broaden the scope of the types of operations you have done, then you start to see, oh, that's why. So not everybody has a breadth of experience of operations in aviation, and so that's why you have to learn from each other. And sometimes an SOP doesn't fit every single situation, but that's why they are standard operating procedures, and they do help save us from a lot of trouble if we follow them. I'm a huge fan of them. The first item that I've seen some confusion on recently is, when do I set my altimeter setting when I'm doing an instrument approach? And I had several people tell me, oh no, I would never set my altimeter setting until I am cleared for the approach. And then guess what these people proceeded to do? Every single approach, they forgot to set their altimeter setting at the field at which they were landing. Because think about it. Is a pilot really going to remember if they're cleared for an ILS, for instance? Turn right 040, cleared ILS 7 right, maintain at or above 2,000 until established. Contact tower 118.3. Do you really think that in the middle of all of that, that they're going to remember at that time to set their altimeter setting? Well, from what I've seen, it's a 0% success rate. Now, the airlines forever have been teaching what is supported by the FARs upon descending through the transition level, which in the US is flight level 180. On that checklist, and as soon as we go through that flight level 180, we switch to the altimeter setting, either of the field when we've picked up the ATIS, which we always have before we start that descent as part of our SOP. So 99.9% of the time we would switch to the field altimeter setting at which we are landing. As a standard operating procedure, if you were to ask an airline or military pilot when they would do this, they would say when descending through the transition level. This is backed up by FAR 91-121, which speaks to altimeter settings. As each person operating an aircraft shall maintain the cruising altitude or flight level of that aircraft, as the case may be, by reference to an altimeter that is set when operating below 18,000 feet MSL to 1. The current reported altimeter setting of a station along the route and within 100 nautical miles of the aircraft. 2. If there is no station within that area, the current reported altimeter setting of an appropriate available station. Or 3. In the case of an aircraft not equipped with a radio, the elevation of the departure airport or an appropriate altimeter setting available for departure. Or if they're above 18,000 feet MSL, they have to set it to 2992. So when we exactly set the altimeter setting to the local field elevation is not a matter of regulation. It would be a matter of best practice or best operating procedure. The airlines and military have come up with these SOPs over decades of realizing how people have screwed up. And unfortunately, an altimeter screw up under IFR, when you're going down to minimums, could be deadly. So there is nothing more important than ensuring that you have that local altimeter setting set prior to beginning that approach. So I think that the best operating procedure would be one to say, as soon as I pick up that ATIS or AWOS or ASOS, I'm going to go ahead as soon as I pick it up and set that altimeter setting in my altimeter. And this is going to ensure that that step is not forgotten. I suppose it is possible that for somebody who has trained it 1,000 times to set the field elevation, the field altimeter, upon being cleared for the approach, may remember to do it. However, I think that it's really setting a pilot up for forgetting to do so. A lot of times things get pretty chaotic. And if you haven't experienced that in aviation, you will. And an SOP needs to be strong enough that it carries you through the most stressful taxiing circumstances in an airplane. That's why we have them. In a debrief with one of these instrument applicants, which he passed, by the way. This is not a pass-fail item on a check ride. However, if I see an applicant do this practice of waiting until being cleared for the approach to set the altimeter, I will always debrief it with them because I don't think it's a good idea based upon what I just said. In the debrief, I asked the applicant, why did you forget to set your altimeter setting to the local field elevation? And he said, well, because I can't set it prior because the controller is expecting me to be on the altimeter setting that they gave me last, so that all of us in the same area of airspace are on the same altimeter setting. If you were to ask any controller about this, they would not expect you to remain on the altimeter setting that they gave you once you have received the ATIS. That's one reason why they make sure you have received the ATIS, and you have to verify with them that you have it prior to being cleared for the approach. I think if we are teaching people when to set altimeter settings, it is far better to set them up for success, to not forget, and also to be trained according to industry standard, which is when they go to an airline, which is the vast majority of people who are learning to fly are doing so to be a professional, or at least a good majority. If we teach them to set it when they're cleared for the approach, then the people at that airline training department are going to look at them as if they have 3 heads, because that's not the way it's been done for decades, okay? And they will have to unlearn what you taught them. So do we want to be teaching our students to do that? Probably not. Hey, a lot of these things are opinions. There's a lot of different ways to do things in aviation. If it is not ruled by regulation, if it does not have a best practice outlined, recommended in the Airman's Information Manual or advisory circulars, then we want to think about the lowest common denominator, the most stressful situation, and worst case scenario of what practice is going to catch us, keep us safe, etc. So in my opinion, we should be setting that altimeter setting as soon as you receive that ATIS or AWOS when you're building and briefing your approach. I teach the ABC. There's a lot of ways to do this too. This is just the way I do it. But A is get the ATIS and set the altimeter. B, build and brief the approach. C, checklist, run your checklist. You guys are going to have different mnemonics perhaps, but I'll tell you what, if your students aren't setting their proper altimeter setting prior to descending to minimums on an instrument approach, that is a big, big problem. If you have questions or comments or perhaps arguments, feel free to list them below. If you have found some advisory circular or some other FAA source that tells us how to do a certain thing, great, please share it. And remember, whenever you hear something that is a different way than you've heard of, or whenever you're doing something in an airplane, don't rely on, well, somebody said so as the reason you're doing it. You need to responsibly look up for yourself, why are we doing this? Especially you CFIIs at the level that you're at. You are teaching the next generation of aviators who are carrying our families around down to minimums. So don't just ever accept what so-and-so said, or even what DPE Carroll said. Read the books yourself. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm cheering for you.